Hello for everybody who had joined our podcast today, and thanks a lot for taking a look at far from the pilot episode. This is something like episode number 3, I believe, or even further. Yes, that's the third episode today. And we have a pretty special guest today, whom I am specifically acquainted with for a pretty long period of time. This is Vlad Mokrousov, who is the software engineer in a startup that provides a pretty interesting data analysis on different views, etc. But I believe that, again, the best introduction is self-introduction. So, Vlad, tell a little bit about yourself and your role.
Sure, Bogdan. Thanks for having me. I'm currently a lead software engineer at a startup working remotely. I have been working as a software engineer for almost 2 years now. I've had my Bachelor of Science at Kyiv Polytechnic University, then worked at different both remote and non-remote startups, FAANG things, done my own startup and then sold it. Kind of small startup, would say. Yeah, that's the brief story.
Anyway, even the fact that you are saying that you had a small startup but had an ability to sell it, that's pretty awesome, because not every single startup that supposes that it is a small one has an ability to do so. So anyway, you had a pretty interesting experience even from the brief overview that you have provided. So why don't you tell a little bit more about it? Like, how did you start it? Why did you decide that you want to go into the software engineering? And what are the main specific checkpoints were during your career until now?
Sure. So I've started, as I said, as a student for software engineering at Kyiv Polytechnic Institute. Started just learning Python and things connected to it. It was kind of the easiest language there. And then I've moved, I didn't have any projects at the beginning, obviously, aside from some student courses. And then I think it would be a good idea to get a job, but we didn't have a lot of opportunities. I think this was the second year. So I just have taken a look around and then saw a program for Google Summer of Code. It's a special program that allows basically students to contribute to the open source programs of different companies, including Google, Facebook, lots of open source stuff there. And then I've made a proposal to one of the companies. It was connected to some aerospace research, also quite an interesting, I'd say, nerdy stuff. Not that impactful though. And then I've completed it. It was like a 3-month program. Developed a solution. Had some presentation at the end, quite fancy. And after that, that was just, I think, at the beginning of third year. I just had an idea of maybe it would be a good idea to take an internship at one of the FAANG companies, or like companies of that big league. And I started preparing quite hard for the interviewing process. So obviously it was very new at that point. So nobody was talking around about how you could get an internship. It was not a lot of people did it, at least from my university. Most of the information was available online, like from US students or UK students or even Japan students, but not the Ukrainian ones. So I've gone hard on leaked code and a lot of that stuff. So solving just technical algorithmical questions. It was quite a lot of work because there are a lot of questions, a lot of materials to cover. But I think it had taken me maybe like 9 months, 12 months to really prepare it. And it's really just you go several times a week, you return, you do your 5 questions like in a Blitz, and then you do some information reading on algorithms, like I think the big book of algorithms, like CLR or something like that, don't remember the name. And at the end, during the next summer, I started applying and interviewing for these companies. So I think the first one that I applied was Jane Street. It was a hedge, I think it's a hedge fund in training. It's super selective, so naturally I didn't go through there. It was the first interview experience, and the first time it's really stressful, and it's something that you need to have quite a lot of experience to get through. And once you have that experience, it's much easier to smooth through the process. But then I've started getting some follow-up interviews from Google and especially from Facebook. And from Facebook, now Meta, they've came to Kiev and conducted on-site interviews. So they've invited several people from all over Ukraine, and we've had interviews on site. That was actually a very good experience to just contact with the engineers there. Some of them, I would say, were from Ukraine, also, quite friendly, great engineers. Had one interview or two interviews there, just like in a roundabout fashion. And then for 2 months or about a month, waited for the response, which finally came back positive. So they moved me to the next stage. And then in a month or two, I've had another interview with them, now remote, through the video. And also have done quite good on them. Had some programming algorithmic questions there, some questions also on, how to say it, probably like social, like managerial. What projects do you like? What projects do you do? What languages do you like to work in, etc. So social skills checking, I would say. So, or soft skills, to be more precise. Which I was a bit surprised. They pay quite a lot of attention to. I would say it's like 50-50 between technical ability and social skills. So you have to get both in order to get into that. Yeah, and finally at the end, they did say that I've got an offer. So that was an offer for the software engineering internship in London. That was in the spring of 2020. So right before the pandemic. And 3 months later, it was all the shitstorm happened. We could say that, to put it not in a light way. And then they said that basically, we cannot proceed with the internship at that point because it would involve a lot of traveling, a lot of contact with people. At that point, the office in Meta was closed. Not everybody was set up with schedule of working like remotely at that time. So it was just like not natural before all of the people were out of office, and very little time span have passed in order for people to basically accommodate and to understand that it's fine to work remotely, get your internship remotely, etc. So yeah, they basically have said your offer is rescinded, and that's why I didn't have the ability to go there to London at that time. So that's kind of a sad story, I'd say. But it has a very positive spin out. So I just thought maybe I should do my own thing and just start something as a side project. And I've thought of an idea that kind of logical, that it would be useful. So if you have the news, right, like the news data, you can operate on it programmatically. You could get a lot of insights from it, benefits, things like that. So which is exactly was the idea that I've pursued. I started to develop it. I think it was probably beginning of summer. Done some prototypes, things like that, and then moved into it kind of pre-production phase, which is publishing into Hacker News. At that point, it was still like a side project, but I've got it almost completely done, meaning it was working, the sign up was working, the login was working, etc. I've published it, and amazingly, I've got a few customers who are saying like, good product, keep going on, and they also like subscribe to some paid plans. So that was my first experience of doing the work, as a business. From then it was like mostly just business development. I got an offer from Bloomberg. It was the second company, and with them the next year I finally got working in London. So that was like I arrived in February and worked up to the summer. Also great London views, just a little bit of traveling there, a little bit of knowing a culture and how it is to work in a bigger company instead of like your own startup. So that's obviously very different. And finally from that, we had some success with that project, which was named Data News. We sold it, and then I transferred to working basically remotely at the startup right now, which is my role at this point.
It's a pretty incredible story, and we're gonna come back to your process of running the startup, selling it, etc. But before doing that, how long did it take for you to complete all the interview stages to Meta? I remember you said there were several months between like one and second interview or something, but what was the length of the whole process?
Yeah, so that was the process for the internship. That's obviously different from the full-time role. For the internship, there were 2 interviews, which were, I think, 1.5 months apart. So there was a first interview, 1.5 months, and the second interview, with the goal being like that you could actually prepare for the second stage. For the full-time role, which have been interviewed like I think that was actually last, I think that was 2021 autumn. So that was before the war at that point. And then I've got an invitation to interview for the full-time position at Meta, which I've accepted and gone through the full interview. There it was much easier. So they knew that I had an offer from Facebook before, so they directly have gone to the on-site. So they've scheduled the on-site interview. It was just 4 interviews in a row, just one by one. Yeah, I've completed that, and a week later I have received an offer letter, which was for full-time position in London as a, I think, graduate software engineer. The official title was, but yeah, that offer I declined that because I already have some interesting work I was doing for the startup, and I kind of like the experience and the options, like the available options I've had.
That's how it usually happens. When you want something pretty hard, it doesn't happen. But then when you don't even think you need this anymore, this for some reason disappears in your life, and you are thinking like, okay, why did this happen at all? But anyway, I want to go a little bit provocative from here. So you have mentioned absolutely correctly that that's most of the people who are studying in, let's say it, post-Soviet universities and have the post-Soviet education in mind as well. They are mostly not aiming at the FAANG companies at all, like finding a job in the local outsourcing company or just finding any IT job seems pretty fine to them because technically the salary is fine for the Ukrainian level, for example, etc. But from your perspective, why is it so prestigious to work for FAANG? Like, what is the reason why people are going there and not, for example, for even the hedge funds, which sometimes pay much more and provide less stress in their work?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are 3 reasons here, like actually 3 categories. One is, and they're very different. One is the hedge funds and other like top tier firms. The second is FAANG, and the third one is like local outsource or even like could be a product dev shops, I would say. So I think FAANGs, they just offer a great opportunity, for a lifelong career. So if you could get a position there, you could say you're set for life, right? Also, that's not so much true, right now, where you get laid off, but those people actually could still get a lot of opportunities and work outside of them. So even if you go to the FAANG first and then join some startup, you already have great experience, and the startup guys would pay you a high price because they already know you've got what it takes. Other reasons, I think, is also that FAANG, they are kind of international. So if you want to move somewhere, you want to relocate in another company, or for example, maybe you want to go to the UK and then you want to go to USA or some other company, they offer those like hefty relocation packages. So that's very nice. In comparison to the local work, I think the salary is some point, but I don't think it's the most important factor. I think it's just generally opportunities, and what challenges you solve on your job. So FAANG, it's very like cutting edge problems that you solve, that you work on, because it's always like on the super scale, hundreds of millions, billions of users on your products. It's always something that has an impact. For a local dev shop, not talking about the general experience of employment there, which could be like subpar compared to FAANG, but still the problems are like much less impactful. And I think that for Ukraine, for example, it's they were not something that I would get excited about. Maybe actually in the recent time, I hope that they've started taking on some military contracts, things like that, like software systems for the military. I think that would be really interesting to work on. So that's something that could get the engineers excited to maybe not choose FAANG, but actually go in some military, development. Yeah, and the last thing you've you've talked about like the trading, etc. I think this is very like niche, and they are like super selective, and just the amount of people who are getting to is much lower. So, for example, I think in Jane Street it's something like maybe 100 interns in total, when for like Google it's in thousands. So that's just numbers difference.
Totally. And you have mentioned a pretty interesting thing about like possibility to work with some military contracts, etc. And my personal opinion is that after the victory in Ukraine, there's going to be a second wave of governmental opportunities. Like in 2019, when Zelensky came to the presidency, there were lots of people who had been starting their politics career, the engineers, the developers, all the other people, and they did it in a pretty awesome way. And it seems to me like there's going to be something similar after the victory, when there will be lots of opportunities to work for some governmental institutions, for, again, military contracts, etc. And that's going to be a prestigious thing. So how do you think, in your opinion, would it be something worth taking a look at, for example, for the new specialists? Like, they got to have a choice, like, between going just to the old-fashioned way, outsourcing companies in Ukraine, like or product companies like Genesis, for example, going to FAANG and try to get their luck there, or maybe working with some national institutions that will probably get like a second rebirth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand the question. Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'll have to put something here. Yep, it's good. Yeah, so I think your question actually hits it on the nail. So right now, during the war, and especially after the war, there will be a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs ready to take the risk on some projects, probably for the government, probably for firms connected to it, etc. And I think even a lot of like international support that's going into Ukraine, right? That would also in itself create like a lot of opportunities for working with non-profits, public organizations, things like United Nations. I think their representatives here, etc. I think for myself, like I think for me an important factor is actually working with the US based kind of people. It could be investors, it could be just some people, like having them as co-founders, because I think it's a factor that's very lacking in the current business environment in Ukraine. So, for example, in US, when you want to bring some business to life, basically, right, you need a lot of like institutional knowledge to get it, right? So you need the business knowledge, you need the marketing acumen, you need the technical ability, etc. And it's very unlikely that one person would have it. And of course, you have to have some VC money, right? In Ukraine, at the current situation, it's like very, very high risk. Startup is itself super high risk, but when you have the war actions happening, you have this constant risk of somebody getting into the army and things like that. It's not a good risk reward scenario. I would put it that way. Therefore, absolutely, let's maybe go after the war, when those factors are gone and we have some money, etc. I still think that for myself, I would probably try to go to the USA and create a business there, because I have already some connections there, and it's much more open. So if you have a great idea, you could just email some VC firm, and if they're interested, they'll invest in you. That's what I've seen. So because I've got a few points in time in my life where I've just talked to the investors, right? And it took just a few meetings for them to basically being ready to sign a check. In Ukraine, you won't get a check for $1 million or $3 million in a few meetings. You'll probably get they'll ask you for a loan, and you'll need to put up your apartment to secure it. That's not a way to do the business. That's $1 billion worth scalable.
Exactly. And as a person who's been running a business in Ukraine, and we've been trying to get some investments, that's honestly a horrible process connection, even comparing that to the process in Canada and the United States, because usually in Canada and the United States, it's mostly like the venture thing. Even if the money lost and there is no profit or no MMR happened at all, investor will not be worried about it, because they understand that this is the venture investment. At the same time, with Ukrainian investment systems, this is always about like regular reports trying to answer your investor the question, why did you not bring any profit in 1 month after the investment has started, etc. And that was a pretty serious aspect, at least for our company when we've been starting out and we've been trying to run the product. So I totally agree with you on that. And anyway, let's talk a little bit about the startup, like the thing that you run with the data aggregator. So I remember that, first of all, you did not start this thing on your own, and you had a friend whom you started that with. But anyway, who was the originator of the idea? So like, was it yours? Was it something that you have came up together, or any other process maybe that happened here there?
Yeah, so that was the idea that I came up with, and I didn't came up to it, as being an idea for business. Basically, it was much simpler. Like, it would be an interesting side project to work on, and from there, really, we start our journey. So like, it's something that's very interesting to do technically. And then after like a month of tool development, I just thought, I have this data, I have this infrastructure behind it, I have an API. There's really should be a way to some kind of like monetize it, and something very simple is just having an API, having it built per request or per amount of data that you make to it. You integrate a simple payment system, and then you put it out on, as I did on the Hacker News, and so the people just subscribe, they make a few requests. That's already working. I think that's great when you have some product and it has a very easy like learning curve. They don't need to do a lot of work. They just sign up, and it's already working like in 2 seconds.
And talking about, you're saying that was everything really simple, and I really love how you possess this process. But anyway, it has included some unit economics development, like integrating of the payments, some marketing. So how did you, like the person who was mostly about software engineering, was coming up with this? How did you identify the monetization model, for example, the business model even? Again, posted on the Hacker News, but still after that you started getting more and more customers. So how did all that happen, and where did you learn this from?
So some of that information I have been I have got by just watching other people doing it. So there is a popular guy, his name is Rob Wallen. He's running actually a seed fund. It's called Tiny Seed, if I remember correctly. So they provide just actually small venture investment, like for the small companies. So it's really like micro VC space. And he has a great book. It's called, I think, Start Small, Stay Small, which is about this kind of business where you have it, very small business starting. You started yourself. Maybe you started as a side project of, aside from your job, and then going from there, you try to slowly develop it. With investing as much cash as you have, obviously, like given that you have some constrained resources. And from my side, really integrating all of these things, it was not some kind of formal process, right? Like let's get a list of vendors, let's review them, let's rate the quality. It's like integrate a payment system. I've got Stripe. Well, they don't work in Ukraine, so have taken a look at another one, which is called like Pedal. It's I think it's a company from the UK, and they also provide payment services. So I've integrated them into the solution, and then also attached it to the billing of the API, which was kind of also an easy thing to do because the framework easily supported that. So that's very simple, really. Like there was no some grand strategy thinking about positioning the product in the market, things like that, trying to market it efficiently. For marketing, it was even less complex. I just registered a Google Ads account, put a few Google Ads on the keywords that were relevant, like news data, news APIs, get news data in Python, and things like that.
Sounds really good. And anyway, except posting, so you said about posting on the Hacker Noon and running some Google Ads, were there any other marketing approaches that you have used, like getting the customers and people always say that it's hard to get the first several customers, but then it's harder to like leverage this number. So what was your approach here? How did you get more customers than the first like 5 or 10?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think that's actually a good question, and it's hard to solve, for every business that goes into doing business. So in my case, I've got a few first paying customers directly from publishing from Hacker News, and we've got, I've got, I think, a few thousand visits onto the webpage. Then actually quite a lot of people got to know the product, got to use it. I think we had some free plan there. So I started also to interacting with these users. So if they ask some question, they look over the documentation. It was natural for me to to provide some support. So I was acting as a customer support, because that's basically a business where you do everything there. And
Absolutely.
some of them, due to good support, good APIs, new features, they actually got on board, onto the paying plans. Uh, Obviously, the Google ads were the main traffic, because for the news data, for example, it's very vertical, right? As I said in the beginning, from news you could get insights, but you could get any kinds of insights, and so there is like users from all fields around, and you cannot really pre-select them in some marketing campaign. That's very hard to do. But what you could do is you could actually put the Google ads, and the people will get, so you get some inbound traffic, which is good enough for converting users. I think the biggest problem I've seen in my startup is or in my side project is just pricing it too low. So I've thought this is a very simple solution. There is nothing to charge here, and I put like two plans for like $50 and $100, right? And that was like the max that you could actually pay me. And then it was staying for this like for 6 months, for like 9 months, and that now I understand that that was the greatest mistake you could you could ever make, because nobody has complained about price, really, like no one, and they just went, okay, we just buy the solution. And so it would have been ideal, right? And I think if somebody would try to get something of this video, I would suggest like price your product as much as possible until someone starts complaining. And you better have more than one, right? I thought that actually a good idea could be just put some enterprise plan, right, and charge people $1,000 like for custom fees. And if you charge people $1,000 for a product, it takes like 10 customers to get to 10K monthly recurring revenue, which is more than enough to support your business, to support yourself, and further development. So that was the biggest mistake I've made during the development.
And summing up this whole like startup running story, in your opinion, what was the biggest impactful factor that made it successful? Like, was it a great idea? Was it the solution simplicity? Maybe just the connections that have made it all. So what was like this foundation aspect that made it run correctly and successfully?
I think there are several factors. One, I would say, is of course this problem was quite niche, right? So I was not competing with Google or other big companies. There were a few other providers, but if you have a decent product, or the product that is good enough, you could actually get a few good customers. So that's the point of getting the customers. Then another one is if you have some idea, right? It's not obvious that it's gonna work at the beginning, and you have to have the skills to experiment continuously and iterate on it. And that's, I think, what helped me to refine what functionality the users wanted, because they ask for new endpoints, new parameters, etc. And just being kind of entrepreneur-like, not finalizing. If you think there is some idea, you have to test it, but if it's not going to work, you have to change it continuously, and make sure that it really works. And don't be attached, you wrote tons of code, don't be attached to it. Like, this is just the code that you brought to solve the problem. If it doesn't work, or the problem has changed, or the customers has changed, you gotta evolve with that.
Yeah, it's a really common problem when people start developing something on their own. they invest their time instead of money, and then it is pretty hard for them to get rid of some solutions until they become legacy. And even after these solutions become like irrelevant and just some legacy part of the symbols, they are still cannot just cut it out and move to something newer. And let's talk a little bit about like raising the investment and mostly about selling your startup. So what was your, if not an action plan, but like this story step by step here? How did it happen? How did you come up to that? Was it hard to sell the startup to somebody instead of continue moving that around? So what was this part about?
Yeah, so selling the startup was actually quite surprising to me, right? Because it's something that I was not planning for. So it's a bit of an interesting aspect because right after I published on the Hacker News, I've got an email saying, acquisition interest. So that was the first time somebody tried to buy it from me. Obviously, they load, I didn't have any subscribers, so they offered quite a low price, which I've declined and continued to work on that. But then I've got several clients, and one of them was quite a big client who was interested. They had actually a mobile app for news, and it was very like cohesive, or there was some synergy into like business things where you have the mobile app as a business, and then you have the news as data, and you can provide them as data. And after that was done, like after they've used our API, they tested the documentation, then they requested themselves, like, could we actually, buy you as a product? And then I said, yeah, we could we could come up with some deal there. And they proposed. It had taken several months of process, to go through some document, to agree on the price, also to transfer everything, obviously, and then to support them through this process. Because I think when you are selling, you're a one-person business, there is a lot that will go into supporting your business, your enterprise, because somebody on the other side of the deal, they basically do not know really what's happening, how it's structured, what stack is involved. So in this case, it was again natural, as I said, because the Python, it was implemented in Python and Java, and these both are very commonly used, technologies. Of course, if you implement something in Rust, right, or like some Erlang, or like Lisp, I don't know, you could come up with anything. It could be quite hard to sell, I would think, because you would have to find someone who is really there to support the product and has the technical capability to do it. Of course, unless maybe you are joining the team and this is like not a core product to someone's offering.
And talking about like the process after you have sold your startup, so you came back to some sort of the hired work, so you technically became an employee once again. Was it hard for you to change this mindset, like from being sort of the self-starter and self-entrepreneur and coming back into the flow of working for somebody and again working with some specified tasks that have been provided for you, etc.? Like, how was this transition process for you?
So for me, I don't think I've actually made that transition. So I've started working on the startup, but the startup offered, they offered me some amount of like options, and that makes that you're kind of an ownership or like co-owner of the business to some extent. So you're not co-founder or something like that, obviously, because you're not getting 50% of equity stake, but still. And then despite that I've joined the startup, I'm still feeling like a self-starter, because actually in the startup, a lot of things that have to be done, they are something that you have to develop yourself, right? So there is no one, you have to go request a permission to deploy something. It's really bottom-up, like proactive, I would say, development. And then in startup, you obviously have to take a lot of decisions that impact everybody on the team, but nobody knows the answers for, and you have to take your responsibility to take on them, which is contrary to the like outsource shops, right, where you're basically assigned some Jira tasks. You're like, okay, this is done, this is done, this is done. this is not done, and that's my decisions for today. You're not taking any product decisions or like business decisions or just generally any decisions. Any impactful decisions are deferred either to the executive team or your managers and their manager, etc.
And again, talking about like all these decision-making processes, like finding the monetization strategy, finding some first customers, selling the startup, etc., and including the fact that you were not alone in this boat and you've been working with your friend together. So, was it hard for you maybe to maintain the friendship and the professional part together? Like, because obviously sometimes when the founders they work together, they have some issues mitigating their possible conflicts or syncing their thoughts and points of view regarding the product development. So, what was this process in your case? Was it hard to maintain the friendship together with the business interests, or was it something that happened naturally?
So in my case, I think it was not hard because I've been having business with somebody I have known for a very long time, and there really was no big issue of working with them. So that was helpful. If you start with something new, I think there could be a lot of problems because you don't know their expectations. They don't know, your expectations. And just generally, I think the core decision you have to make in order to make it work is to decide, who works on what and have the separations of concerns, so that somebody is responsible for one thing and you're responsible for the other. And all big decisions you kind of take together, you consult on it, but also each of you takes the real responsibility behind like things that you make, so that you don't end up where like you two disagree with each other and nothing gets done, but you also don't get to the place where you agree on everything, and so you two both make same mistakes. So you want to have both like some amount of disagreement and the ability to resolve the disagreement, but also being agreeable to some extent that you don't you're not getting like too much conflicts in the team. So you have to just work it out, I would say.
Yeah, sounds pretty impressive and really motivating. And anyway, wrapping up our interview, I would like to end it up with some sort of the Blitz, where I'll be asking a quick questions, and your goal is to answer as fast as possible, like first thing that comes to your mind. But of course, if you want to explain why did you answer something specifically like that, feel free to do that. So we're gonna have several different questions, and the first one is, what's better for you, working in a big company or having a small startup?
Having a small startup.
Okay. Second one, managerial role or being a software developer for all the life?
Hard one, but I think developer would be the better.
Okay. Another one, working in a small team or leveraging it to work in a big one?
Small team, but if small team is less than 6 developers.
Okay. Another one, having soft skills pretty well developed or hard skills? What's more important?
Also hard one. I think probably let's start with hard skills, because actually with this question, in order to succeed, you need both. If you just have soft skills, you wouldn't build the product. If you have this hard skills, you wouldn't. It would be hard to negotiate the business. But I would say it's hard skills, because if you have hard skills, you could learn soft skills. But if you have soft skills, it would be very hard to learn hard skills.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And last one, what's better for you? Being able to implement new solutions or being a specialist that can implement and integrate the legacy ones all the time? What's more important and better?
I think for me, it's always new solutions. So that's why I'm actively working on creating new prototypes. Because I think in startups, you have to create something new in order for it to work. And probably in enterprise, like you have to integrate something old in order to make it work to support all customers. So a twofold answer here.
Awesome. And the last one thing before we end up this interview, I would like to ask you to provide 5 any tips to any audience, technically, to those who are looking for the job in FAANG and thinking about whether it's possible or not, to those who want to run their own startup, maybe to those who are already running the startup and are seeking for investments. So anything from your life experience that you'd like to share try to wrap it up into 5 different tips and suggest them to those who are viewing us right now.
Okay, so that's tips for like building the business, right? We're talking about.
Okay. Anything that you think is important. If it is some tips that you had for integrating into FAANG company, that's possible as well. Like anything that was important in your life.
Sure. So I think tip number 1 is that's probably the advice for Ukrainian engineers or like engineers who are not US based, is that it would be good to have access to maybe a co-founder or like somebody who is involved into your startup in the US, right? Who has like the business understanding and probably some financial resources to get the business going to make it work. That's the first thing. The second one is you have to be really understanding the customer problem and the product, because if you only have hard skills, it will be hard to iterate quickly on the product, because again, it's not the code that matters, it's the features there. And probably I think the last tip is you got to have some to have some courage, to sell your product, your vision, really put yourself out there. Maybe it's a Twitter for you, maybe it's some other social channels, maybe it's just sending cold emails or just cold calling, which I've never got experience to do, and it's a bit of frightening. But I think for some of the big enterprise clients, it's something that you have to do, to get the business to be successful.
Incredible. Vlad, thanks a lot for this conversation. It was super motivating, and I really think that this is extremely valuable information for all those who are watching us at the moment, and maybe will be watching us in the recording as well. And yeah, for those who are taking a look at this video at the moment, don't forget to like and subscribe if you really like the video. If you have any questions to Vlad, maybe something you'd like to find out, feel free to write in the questions in the comments section. And we are ending up for today. Vlad, again, thanks for coming. That was a really great experience.
Thanks for having me.
That was a great interview. Thanks for everybody, and feel free to take a look at the other episodes we have, and please wait for the next ones to come up. We are trying to run them on the regular basis. Thanks to everybody, and stay safe. Bye.